Right now our infection is starting to spread way too quickly. We want the ability to change some of the options so we can instigate some social distancing. And I'm a little concerned that we've got more and more going on behind our controls that we're not able to see. So we want to make sure that we make an area for our controls to be, especially as we're going to keep adding some more. Don't want to miss out on the simulation. So first up, we're going to be making sure that our people only are created and exist to the right of this kind of imaginary line I've got going with my mouse. So I'm going to have my controls down the left hand side, and then I want the simulation to appear in the right hand side. As we add more controls, we're just not going to be able to see as much of the simulation as possible. So that's the reasoning behind it. To get it accurate, your Visual Studio may or may not be running as a DPI dots per inch unaware process, but I suggest that you do click on something to make it DPI if you've even got this issue. It just allows us to accurately figure out where the pixels are. If you don't have this warning, or you're already in DPI unaware process, ignore this message. But if you have a message where it says, do you want to restart in a DPI unaware, click on it, and yeah, we'll be able to count the pixels correctly. So first up, before we start putting any more controls, let's tidy these up a little bit and make sure that our people don't go into our imaginary control zone. So what I've done is I've moved my controls over to the left, almost as far as they can go, and then I'm looking at this, at the track bar that we've got for selecting people, and looking at its properties and finding out its size. Okay, so its size is 199. I'm just going to round that off to 200. And you might have seen that it moves slightly. Its location is -1 apparently. I'm going to start at 0. So that's 200 across. And that's kind of where I want this imaginary line to be. So I don't want our people coming into our control zone. So 200 is going to be that for me. You can make your choice separately. So when we construct a person, we currently look at the form width and height, and I'm saying that we're also going to need a left buffer, a zone for control, so that when we generate our X positions, it's going to generate from whatever we put in as the left buffer. A capital B there. And I'm going to have that as 200 so that it's based off this track bar. This track bar is 200 wide. So we're going to have this area to the left be our buffer zone, be our our control zone. So whenever we pass into a person, it will make sure that X-wise it doesn't draw any people or generate any people to the left of that number. That number is going to be 200. And going to our form code, obviously now the person instantiation of the person no longer works because it says on this it's requiring 3 integers. Well, that's just because we added an extra integer. It requires 1, 2, 3 integers to place a person. So I'm going to throw in there the 200 as well, so that when we run this code, when the people are generated, no one should be generated from to the left of 200 pixels. We'll run it and check that this has worked. So here's our form, and now you see our people are all to the left of this imaginary line. So they're all at 200 or beyond, and we can keep pressing reset, and we see that they keep getting generated. They're a little bit more squashed, especially when we increase the amount of people. But we could go and make the form bigger, and they'll spread out. Make the form smaller. Now, at the moment, because we've not taken into account the left buffer when we are doing collisions, they still will travel over this side, but we'll correct that in a second. So, happy with that being a left buffer. I'm just going to make a variable for that so we can use it elsewhere. In fact, we're going to not make a variable, we'll make it constant int, and then should we choose to change the left buffer later on, we only have to change it in the one place. The left buffer equals 200. So I'm going to replace the number 200 there with left buffer, and then in the person class, when we're moving a person, we use the form width and height, and again, I'm just going to add into their left buffer. And our collision, instead of checking whether we are less than less than 0, I'm going to go for less than left buffer. Again, we don't have to do anything with y because we've not changed that. But we will now have an error on the move person because it's expecting a third parameter. So we're going to go and put that third parameter in. There's the left buffer. And if we run it this time and then run the simulation, we should find that people stay to the left of the 200 mark. Play the simulation. Yeah, they're all hitting this imaginary wall. Infection spreads awfully quickly. And our counters from last time still work, just the same. Okay. So next up, now we've got this space for these controls. We're going to make some extra controls to fit in this little zone. Going to have some more track bar. So that initial track bar that we made refers to how many people we want in the simulation. So I'm going to give it a label. And just call it people. And set it to bold again because it just looks so much better in bold. So people. Then copy that label, but this time instead of being called people or the text being displayed called saying people, I'm going to go people practicing social distancing. People practicing social distancing. And you can manipulate all of these a little bit to put them exactly where you want them, as you want to go. And going to include a new track bar for our socially distancing people. Make it the same width as the other track bar, and another label for identifying what the size of that one is. So I'm just going to copy the existing people label, and because I've copied it, I'm going to send this track bar, because this was the last one I added, to the back, and we've got our label come through. So I'm going to change a few things about this. I'm going to set the label initially to be 0, and I'm going to change its name to being, well, I'm going to try and follow the same naming structures. So this one was called person count label, so this one should be called socially distancing person label. BPL, LBL. Oh, nice. To be able to tell that it's a label straight off. And the track bar, our previous track bar was person count track bar, and this one's going to be socially distancing BPL TR track bar. Forgot what I used for track bar, so I'm just going to check. TRKB capital BR. Yeah. So TRK capital BR. Socially distancing track bar. Now the socially distancing track bar is going to be dependent upon however many people are in our original simulation, and we set on the other track bar a maximum of 500 and a minimum of 1. The minimum on this new track bar is 0, so we still want to be able to simulate without any social distancing, and the maximum, certainly at the start, will be whatever is selected on the other track bar. So it's going to be 250 to start with, because we've got the 250 mark, the halfway between 1 and 500 as being that. And as we change that, we'll need to make sure that this changes, this maximum here changes. So we already had some code for when the value changed. So currently all that we've got going on when the value of the track bar person count changes is we change the label text, so we get to see what's going on. We get to see what value is selected. In addition to that, we will have to change our new track bar, our socially distancing track bar, to being maximum value of the value being selected in the people simulation. And with that, we might need to change the socially distancing label as well. People label equal to, or the text of it, equal to what value is being selected on the track bar. Value. And because that's an integer and we're trying to put it into a string, .toString. So as we change the person count track bar, the socially distancing people track bar will change as well. And we'll give that a little test. Okay, so we've got our new controls on our form. We can set this track bar. Again, I've not done this so it changes the value, so I need to go back and do that before we carry on. So when we change the value of this one, value changed. On the properties, if we go to events, on the value change, if you double click, it automatically makes that subroutine for you that will execute when the socially distancing people track bar is changed. And it's the label that we need to change. So we'll copy what we did earlier into there. So we'll change it to whatever value we select. Give it a run again, see if we get somewhere with this. So initially we should be able to select up to 250 people socially distancing. In fact, we might want to subtract that by 1, so we've always got at least one person who is who's able to move around. But at the moment, we can go to 250, and then if we change the amount of people possible, that changes the track bar of our socially distancing ones, because the maximum changes. So right now, we choose a maximum of 330. The amount of people, if we reduce that, so does this number. This number has to reduce by that because this track bar can't go that high anymore. If we increase it, you see this track bar drops down because we've got this many more people we could have socially distancing now. With 500 possible people, 219 sits in the middle. And there they are. At the moment, these controls don't do anything other than just change these numbers here. But they'll enable us to have control over that in a few moments. Just noticed that we're maybe just a little bit over our 200 now, especially with these buttons and this label. So I'll fix that before we carry on. So to fix the label, we're going to go into the properties of it and change the text size so it's just a little bit smaller. We'll go for 7. So that won't go over the edge. And then our buttons, and place them a bit closer in. Give it a run and see what it looks like. Yeah, that's looking good. There seems to be a little bit of overlap, but I can live with that. We can still see our simulation very effectively on the right hand side and our controls on the left. So now we've got our controls ready, we're going to create our socially distancing person. Now a socially distancing person is no different from a normal person. They'll just act slightly differently. They won't be moving about. So on your solution, just like we did all the way back when we made a person initially. Right click, add new item, and we're going to be adding a new class, a social distancing person. And then click add. Okay, and as I said to you before, a socially distancing person is no different from a normal person. So we're going to have all of the properties and methods that a normal person does, and we're going to do what's called inheritance. So we're going to inherit the attributes and methods of another class. To do that, you have the class name, so in this case social distancing person, and then colon person. So this class is going to have everything that the person class does, plus some parts of its own. And first up, we need to create a constructor. So public, because that's why we're getting the error at the moment. We don't have anything, no parameters that match person with 3 integers. Because even though we're creating a socially distancing person, initially every person, even this inherited class that we've gone for, is going to need these 3 things: the left buffer, the form width, and the form height. So to make a constructor, you make it exactly the same name as the class. So public social distancing person, just like we had public person before. And we're going to be passing in 3 things to it, just the same as we pass into a normal person. And they are the left buffer, the form width, the form height. And we're going to still create the normal person. So again, colon, and we're going to call the base class, we call it. We call the base class with those things that are passing in: the left buffer, the form width, and the form height. So let's zoom into this for a minute. So when we construct our socially distancing person, we're passing in the left buffer, form width, and form height. And what it will do, it will construct the base class, so the person class, and this base here will call person. It knows to call person because we indicated before that it were inheriting from person. So when we run this, it will go and create a person, random location, just as we had before, just as the normal constructor worked, a random location, a new velocity, x, y, etc., and direction, and a colour. And it will also do whatever we put in here as well. Now, our socially distancing person, we actually don't want them to be we don't want them to be moving any direction. We don't want them to have a velocity in x and y. But unfortunately, we can't see a way of changing that. And that's because we had what we saw in the last video, these access modifiers. And just to remind you, if it's private, it can only be accessed in the class. Public can be accessed from outside the class. And we briefly mentioned that something that's being declared as protected is visible from, it's essentially private, but any subclasses which is what social distancing person will be, because it's inheriting from person, we'll be able to access them as well. So I'm going to include here a protected access modifier, protected float, and I'm going to have my VX and VY be protected instead of private. So there they are protected. Now when I type in over here, VX, all of a sudden I can see it. VX is going to be 0, and VY is going to be 0 as well. And I can access those because it's a protected attribute, so accessible in subclass. I still won't be able to access the VX and VY from outside the person class if I wasn't inside the social person class, but because I am, I can now access those two. But because height, width, and X and Y are still private, you see it doesn't come up, we can't see them. There's no height coming up there, there's no width coming up there. So we set those to 0, and I'm also going to have my socially distancing people be a slightly different colour. So our regular person, they were blue. A socially distancing person, let's have them in black. Again, in order to access this attribute from my subclass, I'm going to have to change it to protected. So all of a sudden I can change the colour of it. I'm going to set it equal to black, color.black. Color. Now this is color. Now this color's coming up red again, and that's because in this new class, it's because in this new class, it's not got the drawing libraries. So just like I think we had to do before, we'll use the light bulb to help us. System drawing, and it goes and puts it in there for us. It shows it in a bolder state, so we know that it's being used. So our socially distanced person has no velocity X or Y, and they have a black colour to them. In our form code, when we're creating our person, now we've got the choice. We could create a person, or we could create a socially distancing person. And that's going to be really dependent upon our selection on our trackbar. Our trackbar here, if we choose 0, we don't want any socially distancing people. But if we dragged it all the way to 250, we want 250 of them. So this bit of code now is dependent upon what's in our trackbar. And this for loop goes through and generates all of the potential people. So if we use an if statement and say if I, which keeps track of our count of people, is less than the the socially distancing person trackbar.value. So if it's less than whatever value we've chosen to be socially distancing, I'm going to put into our array of people a socially distancing person rather than a regular person. Socially distancing. Socially distancing person. We still need to pass in left buffer, the the client width, the client height, the height and width of the form. But there they are, that's us putting in a socially distancing person. And anything else, we're just putting a regular person in the array. You may be wondering how we can possibly do this. How can we possibly put a socially distancing person into this array when this array is declared as a person array? Now, because our class here, socially distancing person, is derived from, inherits from a person, we can put our object into this array and it will treat it the same. Because of polymorphism, we can place a socially distancing person into a person array and a person into a person array as well, and any other derived class that we can have from either of these will be able to go into this array. So we can hold a reference of one object in a variable type of another. In this case, it's only done, we can only do that because of the inheritance that we had. So, this if statement just ensures that we make however many we select on the track bar amount of socially distancing people. So if that value is 10, whilst I is less than 10, it will continue to run this one, creating socially distancing people, ahead of creating people. Once I is equal to 10, it then does the else, and it will create normal people, we'll call them for now. So we should be able to run that and see that in action, because we changed the colour of our socially distancing people and our so-called regular people. So our form still loads the same. We've got nobody that is black at the moment. We've got no socially distancing people. Well, that would make sense. The track bar's at 0. So if I set it to 4 and press reset, all of a sudden I can count 4 socially distancing people. We can count 58 of them, 191 of them, 250 socially distancing people, where one of them is actually infected. If we press play, none of them move, because every time we created an instance of a socially distancing person, they had a velocity that was 0. 0 in X, 0 in Y, so they're not moving. Take it down a little bit, so take it socially distancing people down by 1 and reset. Oh, we've got one person that moves now. The reason it's having this kind of chain effect is that the way that we did our collisions, we just replaced the velocities of one to another. So when you've got somebody that's moving, they collide with somebody that's not moving, they swap velocities. So we will need to adapt this a little bit. But you can see that already the spread of the virus is far less now. It's not as fast. It would have grown quite a bit more by now, but it's still got a lot of healthy people identified. If we up this a little bit, we just have the one here, and we should see it move. Oh, sorry, no, because I've set everybody to socially distancing. Take it down to 499, reset, and then run. There we go. We've got the spread of the virus. It's a heck of a lot slower. But at the same time, not really having the demonstration that we were looking for. So next time we'll be extending our polymorphism to help us out when we've got quite a large number of people, making sure that we can effectively check for collisions, because these people here that aren't moving, they are still checking against every single other person in our simulation, checking whether that they would collide with them, and it's not going to be happening. If they're not moving, there's no need for them to check everywhere else. And we'll improve our collisions so that people aren't moving. So we'll see in this example, yeah, when people aren't moving, they don't swap velocities. So our socially distancing people stay socially distant.